I've flown solo with my 1-year-old nearly a dozen times. Usually, people are understanding or kind about me having a baby on my lap. And thankfully, he's a happy, easygoing little guy. He's also very cute, so it's not unusual for strangers to talk to him. I usually don't mind. On my last trip, I was seated alone in my aisle, with a man sitting by himself directly behind me. My baby was tired and fussing. He just needed to settle, but there wasn't much I could do until we were in the air. Almost immediately, the man behind us started talking to my baby. "Oh, hi, baby. Why sad, baby? Cute baby," he said. I smiled politely, replying that he was just tired and apologizing for the fuss. Once we took off, I tried to get my baby settled for a nap, but the man didn't stop. He kept talking to him, and even reached his hand through the gap in the seats to try and grab my baby's feet. I asked him nicely, multiple times, to stop. I explained that my baby was tired, and he needed to sleep, but the man just ignored me. Finally, I put my baby down next to me for a moment, so I could make him a bottle. He was standing on the floor, facing the seat beside me, when the man behind me stood up and reached over my seat to pick him up. I immediately leaned forward to stop him, saying, "No, thank you. I don't need help. Please, no." But the man pushed me back into my seat, mumbling, "Sweet baby, why baby cry?" I didn't hold back. Loudly, I said, "No!" and quickly picked my baby up. I hoped that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. As I rocked my baby, trying desperately to calm him and myself, the man reached through the seats again. This time, he grabbed my arm, saying, "No rocking, no rocking. You make him cry." I yanked my arm free and shouted, "Do not touch me." Once again, I thought that was the end, but I was wrong. I started rocking my baby again, trying to calm him. This time, the man behind me reached both hands around either side of my seat, grabbing me and holding me in place. "No, no rocking. Stop rocking," he demanded. I completely lost it. Clutching my baby tightly to my chest, I struggled to break free from his grip. It hurt, and I was scared, but I managed to hit the call button while screaming, "Let me go! Do not touch me! Let me go! Let me go! Let me go!" He was still holding onto my arms when the flight attendants came rushing over. I could barely get any words out. I was sobbing, and everyone around us was staring. All I could manage to say was that I couldn't sit there anymore, and begged them to move me. The man behind me tried to follow as they moved me, but I made it clear to the flight attendants that I didn't know him, and he couldn't come with me. They quickly intervened and kept him away. I was relocated to a seat near the flight attendants, and as soon as we were settled, my baby fell asleep immediately. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, having a full-on breakdown. Once I'd calmed down, I explained everything to the flight attendants. They were horrified and assured me that they would handle it. Throughout the rest of the flight, the man tried multiple times to approach my new seat. Each time, a flight attendant intercepted him and sent him back. Toward the end of the flight, one of the attendants told me that they had informed the pilot, who had contacted the FBI and local police. The plan was for them to escort the man off the flight upon landing. I, along with everyone who had witnessed the incident, would also be escorted off for interviews. When we landed, the man actually cheered as he was escorted off the plane. I couldn't believe it. I was taken aside to speak with the FBI and give a statement, which made me almost miss my connecting flight. Even after my trip was over, flying back through the same airport was emotional and incredibly stressful. Although I knew he'd been banned from the airline and the airport, The thought of flying again left me shaken. I haven't flown since. A little background. My dad travels a lot for work and has racked up tons of Delta miles. As an early Christmas present, he and my mom used some of those miles to buy me a ticket from Oregon to Montana so I could visit my boyfriend during his finals week. My finals had wrapped up the week before, so the timing worked out perfectly. Luckily, my boyfriend and I drove back to Oregon together for his winter break, so I didn't have to deal with flying home. This was my first solo flight, and probably the only time I'd fly to see him, since he usually drives home during breaks. I had a 2.5-hour layover in Salt Lake City, Utah, before my connecting flight to Montana. To pass the time, I sat at a table near my gate, charging my phone and scrolling through Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. The table was up against a wall, with a large window overlooking the airplanes parked on the tarmac. The tables were lined up along the wall, mostly occupied by one or two people, with big decorative plants spaced between every few tables for some privacy. As I sat there, a man approached me. He was probably in his mid-20s, not very tall, wearing a long, dark coat and carrying just a backpack. Something about his demeanor felt off. When I looked him in the eyes, I noticed they weren't aligned, which made me feel a little uneasy. But I reminded myself that people can't control how they look. So when he said hello and introduced himself, I smiled and responded politely. Then he held out 2 fingers for me to shake, which immediately felt strange. I hesitated, but shook them quickly. He sat down in a chair across from me, placed his backpack on the floor by his leg, and started pointing at the airplanes outside. He muttered numbers under his breath, something about their models or who knows what else. His voice was slurred and hard to understand. I nodded and smiled politely, pretending to be interested, then went back to scrolling through my phone. That's when he told me I was beautiful and asked if I had a boyfriend. Yes, I replied. He then asked if we lived together. No, I said, adding that I was on my way to see him. The man then asked where my boyfriend was. I told him he was in Montana for school. He asked if we were doing long distance, and I explained that we were, but it was only temporary since my boyfriend would graduate in May. I didn't think much of it until later, but I realized I never told this guy where I was from. The man then started telling me I was wasting my time and money doing long distance. He even went as far as to say that my boyfriend and I would break up. His words made me furious. This guy knew absolutely nothing about our situation and had no business saying anything about my relationship. I looked him directly in the eye and told him to leave. Why? He asked, feigning confusion. I don't want you here, I replied firmly. But he didn't stop. He kept spewing comments about my relationship, and I kept telling him to leave, my voice growing louder each time. My anger started to turn into panic, and I began yelling. People walking by started looking over at us, which made me even more nervous. I don't like drawing attention to myself in public. Finally, he picked up his bag and said he would leave. I don't know why you're mad, he muttered. He held out his 2 fingers again for me to shake, like some kind of twisted goodbye gesture. Don't touch me, I screamed. You're being stupid, he snapped as he stood up. The last thing he said before walking away was, good luck on the breakup. Shut up, I shot back, my voice shaky with anger and fear. He muttered something under his breath as he walked away, but I couldn't make it out. As soon as he was gone, I called my boyfriend, crying, and told him everything that had just happened. Then I called my mom. She said I should have gotten up and walked away, and if he'd followed me, I could have gone to security. She wasn't wrong, but in the moment, it's so hard to remember your options when you're scared. Later, as I walked to my gate, I saw him again. This time, he was talking to another girl sitting by herself, introducing himself in that same odd way he had with me. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why was he doing this in an airport? I don't want to assume anything about his mental state or whether he was under the influence of something, but the whole experience left me terrified. At the time, I was living in Austin, TX, but I'd flown out to Los Angeles for the weekend. Some friends of mine put on an annual music festival at a biker bar near Joshua Tree, a smaller, more intimate event where most of the attendees are musicians and everyone knows each other. It's a great time, but it's also a heavy drinking weekend. By the end of it, you're completely drained and need a solid week to recover. I was flying back to Texas, hungover, miserable, and running on empty. My itinerary had me flying from LA to Dallas, then catching a short flight to Austin. I was seated by the window on the left side of the plane, where there are only 2 seats per row. In the aisle seat next to me was a middle-aged woman, someone you'd describe as your average Texan mom, totally unremarkable. We made polite small talk for a few minutes after boarding, but I really wasn't in the mood for conversation. I just wanted to curl up against the wall and sleep. Shortly after takeoff, I put in my headphones, started a movie on my iPod, and zoned out. As the movie played, I noticed her shifting slightly in her seat, as if she was trying to watch over my shoulder. A couple of times, I thought I heard her mumble something like, "Oh great, just ignore me." I convinced myself I was imagining it, chalked it up to being exhausted and hungover. Eventually, I noticed her scribbling furiously in the margins of a worn, leather-bound book. I glanced over and saw that every inch of available space in the margins was covered in what looked like unintelligible chicken scratch. The book itself was an Alcoholics Anonymous text. I thought, okay, just someone dealing with their own stuff. Whatever. I shrugged it off and finally fell asleep. I woke up just as we were landing in Dallas. People started getting up to deplane. I noticed the woman next to me wasn't making any effort to pack up her things or get ready to leave. She just kept scribbling in her book. At this point, I was cranky and had 0 patience left. All I wanted was to get off the plane and catch my connection. When it was our turn to get into the aisle, she still wasn't moving. The rows behind us started emptying, and I finally turned to her and said, "Hey, I've got a connection to catch, so I have to get moving here." I gestured toward the aisle and started to stand up. She laughed, shook her head, looked up at me and said, "Oh no, you aren't going anywhere." I froze for a second, confused. My brain wasn't exactly firing on all cylinders. "I assure you, I am going somewhere. I'm getting off this plane. Now." She shook her head again and said, "But you promised me you'd never leave me." At this point, people around us started to take notice. I made eye contact with a couple of passengers giving me the same, "What is going on here?" look that I was probably giving them. I didn't care to figure out what her deal was, so I just edged and shoved my way past her, muttering, "Nope, nope. I certainly never said that. I'm leaving now." As I squeezed past, she sighed and said, "Well, I guess I gotta go with you then." She stood up behind me, leaving her purse, book, and all her belongings on the plane, and followed me out. Through the tunnel, into the terminal, and up the escalator, she stayed right on my heels, grinning the whole time. I was walking fast, but she kept pace like a shadow. I didn't say anything at first. My mind was stuck on, why is this happening now? Of all the days. I just didn't have the energy to deal with whatever meltdown this woman was having. Finally, I reached the waiting area for the monorail to my next terminal, and she sidled up right next to me, still grinning like a madwoman. That's when I finally snapped. All right, seriously, why are you following me like this? Her response sent a chill down my spine. Because I love you, and you promised me you would never be apart from me. I laughed nervously, looking around at the strangers waiting for the train, and made sure to loudly announce, no, I did not promise that. I have no idea who you are. The train arrived, and I got on. But of course, she followed. She started trying to hold my hand as I moved around the monorail car, trying to put some distance between us. I was frantically texting the girl I was seeing at the time, explaining what was happening and how terrified I was. My phone battery was at 1% though, and it died before I could get a response. At this point, I was genuinely creeped out. Her eyes were completely vacant. There was no life behind them, just emptiness. She didn't blink. Combined with her unrelenting grin, I was becoming convinced that she was going to snap at any moment and do something violent, like shove me down an escalator or worse. She kept grabbing at my hand and following me no matter where I moved in the car. I finally turned to the other passengers and said loudly, I have no idea who this woman is. Seriously, can anyone get a hold of security or something? But everyone just avoided eye contact. Not a single person responded. It was like they didn't want to get involved. And suddenly, I felt like I was the crazy one for asking. Finally, the train reached the terminal. I practically ran toward my gate, with her still right on my heels. She was muttering things like, "You can't get away from me this time." My heart was racing as I scanned the crowd for any sign of security. I spotted a woman in what looked like a police uniform and rushed over to her. "Excuse me, are you security or police? See, this lady..." I started, but she just shook her head at me and walked away. It was baffling. How could I be in an airport, a place where security is supposed to be everywhere, and not find anyone to help? Desperate, I went straight to the desk at my gate and interrupted the agent standing there. I forced a half smile and said, "Hi, so, this woman standing right next to me, I have no idea who she is, and she's been following me for quite some time." Both agents laughed. The male one joked, "Oh, long vacation, huh? Hyuk, hyuk. Seriously, what can I help you with?" To my horror, the woman behind me laughed along with them, rolling her eyes as if I was the ridiculous one in this scenario. I chuckled nervously, shook my head, and said firmly, "No, I mean it. I have no idea who this woman is." Finally, they seemed to notice the desperation in my tone and the look in my eyes. Their smiles faded. Can we see your boarding passes?" one of them asked. I handed mine over, and she produced hers from her pocket while I explained. She was on my last flight. She even left her purse on that plane, all the way in the other terminal. The agents conferred quietly for a moment, making a few hushed calls. I stood there, completely ignoring her as she continued trying to grab my hand. Finally, one of the agents returned and said, "Come with me." They whisked me through a side door and slammed it shut behind us. leaving her on the other side. I was boarded onto the plane about 10 minutes before anyone else, and as the staff filtered by, each one apologized profusely for the situation. Once the other passengers started boarding, many of them shot me confused or sympathetic looks as they passed. The man seated behind me leaned forward and asked, "Hey man, what was that?" I gave him a brief version of the story, and he shook his head. "She had a complete and total meltdown the second you got on the plane," he said. "Screaming, tearing her hair out, pounding her feet. They had to take her away in handcuffs. You really didn't know her?" "Nope," I replied. "Not at all. To this day, I still have no idea what was going on with that woman. I never got any follow-up information about the incident, who she was, why she thought I'd promised her eternal companionship, or why she latched onto me like that. But every now and then, I think about the look in her eyes when she said, 'You promised me you'd never leave me.' And every time, it makes my skin crawl. So effing weird."